There are a few different types of movies out there that depict people making a huge difference without knowing it. But one of the most famous has to be Forrest Gump, the tale of a man with an IQ of 75 influencing, being present at, or otherwise a part of some of the most important events of the 20th century, and all the while not understanding just how significant any of it is. Instead, he just tries to live his life according to his simple philosophy: be nice to everybody. Now, despite how popular and critically acclaimed the movie was, to the point that it actually won Best Picture and beat out several other great films in the process, some have tried to argue in recent years that it's not as good as many initially said it was, with some modern critics, professional or otherwise, giving it some downright scathing reviews. But despite that, the movie is still almost universally beloved among audiences, with many quick to defend the film against those who speak ill of it. And today, while keeping my personal feelings on the matter out of it and staying completely objective, I'd like to explain the various reasons why many people might gravitate towards this movie and specifically go over what makes it so appealing to them. And there will be major spoilers for this movie ahead, so if you haven't seen it yet, you shouldn't proceed with this video. You have been warned. Alright, so to give the short answer first, a major reason Forrest Gump is still so beloved by many today is because of its simple message that one doesn't have to be smart in order to do good and make a difference in the world. And in a day and age where more and more emphasis is put on people's intellect as their most important quality, that's a really good message for people to hear. That you don't need to be Albert Einstein. You don't need to have been the top of your class and graduated with honors. You don't have to have an IQ of 200 to accomplish everything that you want to in life. You can be completely average or even below average and still find everything you're looking for in life, and maybe even do a lot of good in the process. And considering most people in this world are not among the exceptionally smart, that is a very comforting thought for them to have. But there's also more to it than that. Because Forrest Gump may not be smart, but that's not what defines him. Instead, that would be his extremely compassionate nature. When all's said and done, he has the heart of a child, and though that does occasionally get him into trouble, in the end it usually ends up benefiting everyone around him and himself. And once again, people can find that very encouraging. Because Forrest Gump doesn't need intelligence. He doesn't need ambition. He doesn't need a bunch of superficial things to make him happy. Instead, he enjoys the simple things in life first and brushes off all of his amazing accomplishments that anybody else would see as the highlight of their life as simply interesting anecdotes, and talks more enthusiastically about much more trivial things, such as mowing the lawn simply because he likes doing it. Basically, the appeal of Forrest Gump is that it's the complete opposite of most success stories, and it's one that resonates with a lot of people. Because for one thing, you'd expect a movie like this to end with him as a complete failure, held back from his dreams because of his limited intellect. But instead, the only dream Forrest Gump has is to be with Jenny, and accomplishes many great things pretty much without even trying. But what's most notable about it is that, for all of his success, it can't give him the things he values most, because his money and success can't save his mother, Bubba, or Jenny from death, and having them in his life is more important to him than all of that. Though he is still able to find happiness and purpose in taking care of his son, so at least there's that. But the point is, Forrest Gump is a person uncorrupted by the pressures, expectations, and evils of society. He's a man who values people, nice experiences, and being kind to others above all else, and as a result lives the way most wish they could live. In other words, Forrest Gump speaks to the good person inside everybody, because he not only improves the lives of others simply by being a good person, but is also rewarded for his good deeds rather than having to suffer because of them, since the only thing keeping his life from being perfect, that being the aforementioned deaths of the people he cares about, are completely beyond his control and is not in any way responsible for them. And this is where Jenny comes into the picture, because she's not only meant to be the complete opposite of Forrest Gump, but also somebody the audience is unfortunately able to relate better to. And I know there are those who hate her and believe she takes advantage of Forrest throughout the movie, but it's a lot more complicated than that. Because while Jenny may be a lot smarter, Forrest had something a lot more important in his upbringing that she didn't. Love. He had a very loving mother that went above and beyond to do right by him and teach him how to be the great person he would become. While Jenny, on the other hand, had an alcoholic father that, shall we say, made her feel completely useless and unloved. So as a result, she makes all the wrong choices in adulthood, which only makes her feel even worse about herself and eventually results in her early death. To put it another way, this movie is actually a great demonstration of nature versus nurture, because by all outward appearances, Jenny had all the advantages to become everything she wanted to, while Forrest Gump was going to face an uphill battle accomplishing anything in life. But because one was raised by a great parent who gave him the love and support he needed, while the other was raised by a worthless drunk that completely messed her up, the exact opposite ends up happening. Especially because Jenny's behavior mirrors that of many who had to suffer at the hands of parents like hers. She has extreme low self-esteem, which drives her to make poor decisions that only make her feel worse about herself, resulting in an endless cycle that causes her to almost contemplate ending it more than once. And her relationship with Forrest is the one thing with the potential to break that cycle. Because Forrest is the one person in her life that treats her with respect and like an actual human being. To him, she's the greatest woman who ever lived, and treats her as such. The only problem is, because of her self-esteem issues, she believes he's wrong about her and that she doesn't deserve such a nice man. In other words, her continually pushing Forrest away basically boils down to the fact that she feels she doesn't deserve him, and maybe even a fear that she'll end up destroying him the way she destroyed herself. Now, I know some might bring up that she does go back to him a couple of times, but look at the life this woman leads. Even if a lot of it is self-inflicted, one can't deny that living a life like hers is rough. And she occasionally gets so desperate to escape her torture that she goes back to the only true friend she ever had, the one person who would never hurt her, for a reprieve from it all. But then, after a while, those same self-esteem issues and fears of hurting him return, causing her to push him away again. In other words, Jenny does bring most of her problems on herself. There's no doubt about that. But it all stems from childhood trauma and fears of hurting the only person who ever cared for her, rather than her deliberately trying to take advantage of her mentally slow friend. And really, the scene where she breaks down in front of her childhood home is really telling in this regard, because to her, it was what happened in that house that destroyed her life. Her father took away any chance she had of living a happy life, and the realization of all that comes crashing down on her at that moment. Once again, it may not have been intended, but the nature versus nurture lesson that can be taken away from this movie is a pretty strong one. But the point is that Forrest is able to see the best in Jenny, despite her believing it doesn't even exist. And just as with Lieutenant Dan, his influence is able to bring that out in her. It's just that unlike Dan, her issues prevent her from embracing it until towards the end. But it was always there, as evidenced by the fact that she was the only person who was nice to Forrest from the start and defended him from others, which is why he grew to care about her in the first place. And in the end, being the kind person he was, Forrest returned that kindness to her tenfold instead of abusing or taking advantage of it like so many others in her life would have. So once again, Forrest Gump is a movie that enforces the idea that all one needs is a little compassion to make a huge difference in the world. He improves the lives of so many people and is able to live relatively happily himself, all because he was simply a nice person helping out whenever he could. And for most people in the real world who can't live the way he does, that's pretty comforting to see. Especially because it goes against what many other movies preach, that hard work takes years to make any sort of change, and that doing good will invariably come at your own expense. Though that's not to say that also isn't true, at least to an extent. And while that may not make Forrest Gump the most realistic movie ever made, it's still one that speaks to a lot of people. It shows the value of kindness and compassion and the effect it can have on people. And once again, many can find that very compelling. And what's particularly notable about this is that the book this movie was based on was almost the exact opposite of that in many ways. Because in the book, Forrest Gump is a lot more abrasive, has a temper, swears like a sailor, and lives in a world more akin to The Simpsons. But the writers of the movie opted to put more emphasis on Gump's good qualities and place him in a world much more like our own. And the results led to one of the very few movie adaptations that is almost universally considered better than the book. Because even those who don't like the movie tend to agree that it's better than the novel, which has been described as mean-spirited and can have a difficult time getting the reader invested in certain characters that aren't particularly likable. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, what exactly is my point here? That the movie version took the foundation set up by the book and managed to turn it into a story that touched a lot of people. Because instead of being an impulsive brute with nothing to do, Forrest Gump instead becomes the compassionate man that accomplishes his goals of doing good in the world, and in the end is able to improve the lives of pretty much everyone, himself included, with nothing but his kind nature to go on. And as I've already said a million times, That's a very uplifting story to many people. The thought that one doesn't need to be smart to do good, that being nice is all they need, or maybe even the thought that somebody as nice as him really is out there and would gladly help someone if need be, are all things that speak to people on a personal level. And while people can try and tear down his legacy all they want to, the fact still remains that they can't take away that aspect of it, which is what made people love it so much in the first place. Alright, I think that's everything I had to say on that. So why don't all of you tell me? Do you believe that the message behind Forrest Gump is one that's worth defending? Or do you believe that there is something to what its critics say? Please let me know whatever you think in the comments below. And as I always say, you do not have to agree with this video just because you watched it. You can feel about Forrest Gump and the general consensus surrounding it that you want to, and I nor anybody else can tell you you're wrong. And thank you all for watching. It is very much appreciated. And I hope to see you all next time.